Hi, and welcome to another episode of This Week in Plymouth. I'm your host and your Town Manager, Derek Brindisi. This afternoon, we have Mr. Barry DeBlasio, who is joining us probably for his final episode, at least in the capacity as the Director of Community Resources. Barry, thanks for coming.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
So Barry, I've been doing this show for the past year since I started back in March of 22, and my primary motivation is just to provide good information and the facts to the community so they actually know what's going on in town government. This episode is different because we're going to be talking about you. You announced about 6 months ago that you would be retiring after 20 years of service here in the town of Plymouth, and I thought it would be just a really good opportunity to talk about everything that you've done for the town during your 20 years of service to the community. So thank you for joining us. I guess we'll start by just introducing you to the folks that don't know you. So you started working for the town of Plymouth 20 years ago.
Yeah.
Prior to that, though, so you're a recreation guy by trade, right? You've been doing recreation pretty much your entire life.
Went to school for recreation management, UMass Amherst, and started right out of college working as the recreation program director for Weston, and spent some time there, and then moved on. Actually was a stockbroker for Fidelity Investments. Missed my recreation calling and decided to go back and did some work for Barnstable, town of Barnstable, and also with the Jewish Community Centers of Greater Boston, managing all their athletic facilities. From there, I went to Texas, managed some athletic facilities there. Brief stop at New Seabury Resort as the director of beach and recreation there. And I was enjoying that position, and then the opportunity came up in Plymouth, and I thought I would take a look. And honestly, I can still remember 20 years ago, I knew Plymouth, and I was familiar with some of the resources that the community had. But after driving around and really looking at places like Forges Field, Cedarville, and some of the beautiful parks off of there, Morton Park, I was just enamored by it. I mean, as far as recreation facilities, this place was one of the best I had seen, and I've seen a lot of places. So I went through the interview process. Was constantly told that you won't get the job because you're not a Plymouthian, but I proved them wrong, and I did, and enjoyed my first job here as the recreation director, and it was great. Had a interesting opportunity meeting everyone, and I think hopefully most people will agree that we built a really strong department in recreation. And eventually I was asked to take over community resources when that opportunity came.
Right. Yeah, and we'll talk about that in a minute. But just getting back to recreation, so
Sure.
How many years did you serve as the recreation director here in town? About 15?
So about 15 years, yeah.
15 years.
Yeah.
And so if you look back on the time that you've served 20 years here in town, can you take us through some history lessons of the changes that you've seen? I mean, so being from Worcester and really honestly as a kid growing up, we've just played the big sports, football, basketball, and baseball, and we really never enjoyed the being outdoors. And then you come to Plymouth and there's 360 ponds and all these parks and people going kayaking and hiking, and I mean, you've seen all that and you've been a part of all of that. Can you kind of take us through a lot of the changes that you've been able to lead the town in the last 20 years?
Well, for one, I'll never forget my first interview with the local paper, and they said, looking around at our facilities, what do you see missing? And I said, well, it would be nice to have an aquatic facility here. And I was quickly reminded, through the media, that Plymouth has 360 ponds and we don't need no pool.
Yeah, right.
So, I learned very quickly that, you really have to really get out and look at these resources. And I didn't visit all of those ponds, but I was able to visit many of them. And it is true, we are just blessed with so many natural resources. Not only natural resources, but Forges Field, I'll be honest. I mean, I had visited a lot of athletic parks. When I first looked at Forges, I was amazed that a facility like this existed. And it was so pristine, well manicured and taken care of, and well utilized. And I was really impressed. And then I saw Seaver Field, which just reminded me of this old time ballpark with the bleachers built into the, the side of the hill. It was like, oh my God, this is like a true neighborhood park. And, then Morton Park, and, just in the middle of downtown, this beautiful over 120 acre facility that just seemed pristine in the off season. And, then Fresh Pond. And I was just amazed by the things that we had here. The Menominee Youth Center is where I spent a lot of my time in the beginning. It was kind of the hub of the indoor recreation at the time. And that's actually where I first met Selectman Cavaco. We partnered a lot to try and get the youth center a little more utilized, and it was pretty successful. I was able to see that. I got used to looking at and working with all of the youth leagues in Plymouth, and it was incredible how large both your Little League system was, your youth soccer program was, and it was great getting to know all those people and schedule all of the athletic fields in the community, and I was impressed right from the beginning.
Well, I mean, it's a good point. Again, having grown up in the city, and we're accustomed to public pools, and then which many of them were built in the 60s and 70s,
right.
And the city went through kind of a renaissance about 20 years ago and started taking away the pools and having spray packs because they were more cost effective.
Exactly.
But then and then you come, like you just mentioned, you come to Plymouth. And okay, where's the spray pack? Where are our public pools? And you hit the nail on the head. Well, you don't need those. We have 36 miles of coastline, beach,
yeah.
And then you have all these ponds. So it's to our advantage. We don't have to invest in spray packs and pools because we have, like you said, those natural resources. I was with over the weekend. I was with a friend trying to explain Plymouth, who just moved from Arizona to Massachusetts, and I had said to them, having spent some time on the water and kayaking some of the ponds, I said, most of these ponds, you can look down and you can see the bottom because they're so crystal clear, they're so clean, which is very different growing up in other places.
Sure. Well, it's interesting. I did some work with Gilbert and Chandler, Arizona, where the difference there is in the cities, it's all about the man-made structures. There's an absence of swimmable lakes and things like that. So the facilities are incredible. A municipality may have 12 outdoor pools, and even Boston, in the old days of DCR pools or MDC pools. So if you come from an urban environment to a place like Plymouth, it is a little bit of a change because we turn to the outdoors for hiking, for biking, for all of those those resources, the coastline, and the multiple beaches that we have, and the golf courses and the other things that really, so you shift from almost indoor recreation to outdoor recreation. Not saying that we couldn't use some more indoor spaces, we definitely could. We still have some pretty aggressive winters, but we're unmatched as far as outdoor recreation amenities. I believed that 20 years ago, and I still believe that today. And one of the things we did too is we had the addition of places like Center Hill Preserve and Hedges Pond, which was the project that I was involved with. Getting to design a 128-acre park from scratch from the very beginning and build it to exactly what you want is a rare opportunity. And all these years later, I'm still thankful that this community gave me the chance to do that. And I think it turned out pretty good.
Yeah, Hedges Pond. That's it. It's interesting that you bring that one up because we all had taken had done a site visit a couple months back because of the cabins, and thinking about the potential of those cabins and whether or not the town should probably tear those buildings down. But I was with a select person who really had been born and raised in town and who had visited Hedges Pond for the first time, and he was amazed at how beautiful Hedges Pond was, and again the crystal clear water and the sandy beaches. And you're right, it's a great place. And then there's other places like look at Stevens Field. I mean, there's going to be a $4 million investment into Stevens Field, and when that project is complete, it's going to be I think that's going to be another gem here in the community as well.
Yeah, I think that was, that's the one I wish I had gotten to see through to fruition is Stevens Field, because Nelson, Nelson and Stephen were kind of the anchor parks of the downtown. And, if someone asked me to classify those parks when I first came here, I would have said they're absolutely scenic parks because of the vistas. And, as a recreation professional, we look at balancing active recreation with passive recreation, walking and sitting and drinking your coffee and walking your dog. And those are really important things. Nelson Park originally was an old soccer field with not much more there, and a parking lot where you could actually just drive up to the water. And I think many old Plymouthians will just remember, their fondest memories are just driving the car down to the waterfront, drinking coffee and just watching the sun.
Right.
And so it was really interesting to watch that project evolve. Thank God David Gould actually spearheaded that campaign, and we're joking about splash pads. I was the one that had to fight to put that splash pad in there. And it was an interesting conversation because we knew that the park was just incredible. We didn't want to take away from the natural scenic beauty of the park, but we wanted to add a feature that kids could really hang out at and enjoy without having to go into the water. And so that's how we came with the splash pad. The original design was this huge monstrosity. And if you've ever been down to Nelson, you know how popular the splash pad is and how difficult parking can be. Thank God we didn't go bigger, or people would have been coming from Worcester to go to that splash park. So I think it came out right, and it's definitely one of our assets. And now watching Stevens on the other side, watching this plan really evolve, we've had so much community input, more than we usually have had with almost any other park project. And it's changed to try and accommodate all of those interests. Do you focus on this, the scenic vistas of that park? Do you create and maintain the active recreation, the baseball field, the tennis courts, the basketball court that is there? It's a residential area, so no pickleball or pickleball, and that, or a dog park.
Right.
And so this process, I think, really has been vetted extremely well, and I think the final project is one that everyone will enjoy and will truly be a community asset to the people that live around the park and everyone that lives in Plymouth. And
Yeah,
I'll come back and visit to see.
Well,
that.
it's funny you bring up Stevens Field because I don't share this story often. Certainly, I've never shared it publicly. But when I was the assistant town manager, the Pawtucket Red Sox were coming to the end of their lease agreement in Pawtucket, and I remember talking to a few people, and I'm like, wouldn't it be great to build a baseball stadium down at Stevens Field, much like they built in San Francisco, where you hit the ball in the water? And I came back 7 years later. The Red Sox ended up going to Worcester. They relocated to Worcester for a $120 million baseball stadium, and we're going to get a $4 million renovation of Stevens Field. So I think it was a win for both communities with what happened. But the splash park over at Nelson, it'll be 80 degrees this coming Friday, and I can guarantee you I'll have my 3-year-old grandson, and we'll be hanging out in the splash park. You can take the person out of Worcester, but you can't take the Worcester out of it. So we like splash parks, but to your point, I mean, people enjoy that stuff. That's what they like, and it's safe. The kids are in the enclosed area. The parents can sit there, and the kids can run around, and they don't have to worry about going in the water. So that was if that was your idea, it was a good call.
That was my idea.
So that was one of your crowning achievements, Barry. Speaking of achievements, I know it was not that long ago you received an award from Mass Recreation, right, for the Humanitarian Man of the Year award. Is that correct?
Yeah, actually it was last week at their annual conference. I received the Eric and Peter O'Brien Humanitarian Award for Park and Recreation Professionals. So it was quite an honor. It's it's given away annually, and it's done by vote. So to see my colleagues choose me in that capacity and come out in full attendance to support it, it was a nice end of a career.
Of a good run. Well, I mean, you've done a lot. I mean, I know we've talked about a lot of the things you've done locally, but at the statewide level, you were the past president of Mass Recreation. You served on, was it Governor Baker's task force for outdoor
recreation during
COVID? So you can
yeah.
talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, so It was COVID. You still have nightmares.
Little PTSD from COVID.
But I'll tell you, it was interesting to be involved from the inside, because the way it worked is the governor had set up task force for a bunch of different areas, and recreation was one of them. Camps, daycares, some of the others. And so I was on a group of with 6 other individuals from throughout the Commonwealth, and our goal was to try and come up with policies, and which was next to impossible, because we all know the rules for COVID were changing,
Right.
almost weekly. And so it was really interesting to see how this process was vetted, and how everyone had a different opinion. I can just remember, I think I was one of 2 park and recreation professionals on the force, and one of the policies had called for wiping down all playground equipment and basketball courts after.
That was your idea?
No, but
Oh,
I
was gonna
stopped
say,
that.
Okay.
But because from a user's perspective, they couldn't understand. They think there's an abundance of staff just waiting at
Right.
every outdoor recreation area to clean these facilities. And as a professional in the business, we knew that this was just not cost effective, and
Right.
that it would not be feasible to do. And we still weren't sure why it needed to be done. The science was still evolving, and we didn't know that we had to wipe it down. So some of those initial ideas were quelled, and they didn't come to fruition, thank God. But it was an interesting process to watch camp staff ratios evolve, and the logic behind that. We made some swimming using a community pool where the chlorine would actually prevent the transmission of so there was just a lot of really interesting debate that came through, and it was interesting to be involved in that select group that would then make policy for the Commonwealth to use. So
Right.
yeah, although it was horrific, and only because the information was changing so quickly, it was a unique and an amazing experience that I'll never forget.
Yeah, and that was a unique time, and like you said earlier, the science was evolving, and a lot of the professionals like yourself were just using your experience based upon what you knew and what you've done over the years' experience to try to make sound policy recommendations. I remember being the town manager in Upton, and I'm thinking, like, who's coming up with this stuff? So now that
was
I know,
me.
you were one of those guys. Yeah. And I also remember a phone call from parents saying, there are kids using the playground. What are you doing? I'm like, well, listen, they're outside, they're having a good time. These kids have been stuck in the house for 6 months. Like, and it was an interesting time for everyone. So.
And think about, it was the idea that it was safe to be outdoors.
Right.
So everyone flooded our parks, our beaches, and it was quite a task to manage that influx. The great part is, it really, grew our base. So many people became advocates of outdoor recreation and investing in parks, in the playgrounds, upgrading them, and that was really helpful.
And I think, at least from Plymouth's standpoint, the population started to swell as well, because a lot of folks were leaving the more urban areas where you're shoulder to shoulder, and they were coming to places like Plymouth where there was more outdoor recreation, there was more space as far as the square footage on your property line or in your house and stuff like that. So I think the town benefited to a certain degree from COVID as well.
Sure.
But you mentioned earlier in this episode that about 5, 6, 7 years ago you became the director of community resources, which is obviously much larger than just recreation.
Sure.
Can you talk a little bit about that experience and
Sure.
what you were able to forge with that work?
Yeah, it's interesting because the model outside of Massachusetts for community resources is, the park and recreation, the library system, veterans, senior services, and they tend to group them all in one group. And we had that here in Plymouth without recreation. So I remember meeting with the town manager at the time and saying, take a look at what's happening down south and out west. This
Right.
is sort of the new model. It wasn't new to them, but it's a model that people were moving towards, even in Massachusetts, where they were focused on community programming, departments that offered programs and services directly to the community. And I thought it would be a good model here, and she agreed. And so when the old community resource director retired, I applied and was hired into the position, and it was great.
So you took the recreation division,
Pulled it
which
with
was
me.
under the DPW at the time, right?
Correct.
So you pulled the recreation work out of the DPW and moved over to community resources. That was under your leadership.
That's correct. Yeah, that was my recommendation, actually. And, it was a tough decision because, there are some models where Park and Rec stay together because it's, you have one group schedules the facilities and one group maintains the facilities, and they're working together. And that's really helpful because, you can only schedule a facility that's ready to be scheduled if it's in shape and it's playable and usable. And so by having them together, they sort of know why we do this, why we keep these fields pristine, and why. But when you separate them, it's tough because obviously the people that maintain the facilities would like to see them utilized less, and the people that schedule them would like to schedule them more.
Yeah, right.
So there is a little bit of a challenge, but I think, we worked, having come from DPW, good communication helped us get through all of those, I'll say disagreements, but I think it worked out in everyone's benefit. And now I think both departments fully understand how hard the other one works to properly utilize our resources.
Right. And I do agree that when you look at the Department of Community Resources, it's so focused on the residents, which is very different than what the Department of Public Works is focused on. They're focused on infrastructure, right? So, that was a great recommendation that you made, and I think it's going to make this transition a little bit easier, as you leave and we look for your successor. But there's so many other things that you've done as a community resources director because, under your stewardship, you have the Veterans Office, you have the library,
Cal.
you have the Cal. There's so much more that you've been leading. I mean, even other things that the courthouse and the museum are still under
Memorial Hall.
Yeah, Memorial Hall.
Yeah, it's certainly an eclectic group with a lot of different areas, but it's an active group. I mean, two of my departments provide services 6 and 7 days a week, and on holidays too. So Memorial Hall, we have concerts going until midnight.
Right.
It was a challenge to watch Cal in this brand new Center for Active Living, and for those of you who don't know, in this 20,000 new at the time, beautiful facility just grow and actually exceed the expectations, and kind of be bursting at the seams was just incredible. So again, I happened to step in at a time when really interesting things were happening. Library was undergoing its strategic plan. Disabilities Commission was engaging in a self-evaluation and transitional plan for the town. Right. So, yeah, a lot of interesting things happened during my time, and yeah, I was fortunate to be able to be a part of that.
Well, and again, it just speaks to the type of person you are. That, I mean, you just mentioned the Disabilities Commission, the Center for Active Living, the library. Those, although they have one thing in common, that's the people, they're very diverse, and the disciplines are very different. And so for you as the director to try to have to manage all that, all those moving pieces, I think is, speaks to the type of person you are. But I'm sure people don't realize that given everything we just described, that you could get a phone call on a Sunday night because Memorial Hall is leaking, or get a phone call on an early Saturday morning on 4th of July because something's happening in Morton Park with the recreation office. So,
exactly.
I mean, you, much like the fire chief and police chief, are probably on call 24 hours a day, especially during the summer months.
Especially, yeah. And we expect it. It's going to be your busy season, and I wouldn't trade it for anything. You kind of live for that. What's changed in the 20 years is, the winter used to be a downtime, and that's just not the case in this community anymore. I mean, look at the demographics and how much we've changed in the 20 years that I've been here. We're now one of the top destinations for over 55 communities. You've seen these planned developments just spring up with their own recreational needs, and it's really been a challenge.
So speaking of challenges, because we probably got about 4 or 5 minutes remaining,
okay.
If as you leave, what what advice would you give me as a town manager of some of the challenges that I need to be aware of with the work that you were leading?
You know, the thing that I've always appreciated about this community is people will tell you what they want. Whether you like it or not, they're going to tell you. But as we've grown so much, the needs are different. So I think you just need to really focus on, getting things completed. Have a master plan. I mean, our planning department's absolutely incredible. Our economic development departments are amazing. Working on a downtown center will be,
Right.
will be
idea.
huge for this community. And so I would say listen to the community, but don't let its needs overwhelm you. Really stay on a planned development course here. We have to keep getting these things done. The other thing is really look at the infrastructure that we have. It's aging like many are in Massachusetts, and really try and manage those costs as best we can. We have a lot of facilities, and unfortunately facilities are expensive to maintain. So I think
you would advocate for more resources into our parks.
Yeah, I mean, our parks are, they're the lifeline of this town. And not only, we say parks, but let's not forget about all the open space and conservation land we have. I mean, it's just incredible. Looking for walking trails, for all of those things. So as we acquire more of these, and CPC's been amazing at that, we just need to make sure that we keep telling the community what we have out there. And, they do need maintenance, unfortunately,
Right.
But they're so worth having.
Well, I know, Barry, you and I met back in 2015. I was the assistant town manager, and I think you were just coming in probably a few months after I started as a community resources
Right.
director.
The good
Connie
old days.
DeLago, I think, was just leaving, and
She
that's when
was.
you took over. And, when I departed in 2017, you and I always maintained a relationship. In fact, there were many times I called you and said, hey, I got a recreation problem, not a question. Can you give me some advice? And then I remember I came down from Upton, and I brought the recreation director, and you showed us around. So you're just giving us good advice. So for that, I thank you, because when I was the assistant town manager and when I was an Upton town manager, you've always supported me. I always appreciated that. Then I came back as a town manager, and you were, again, always there supporting. And, I wish you well, but at the same time, I wish you weren't going, because we do have a good relationship
Yeah.
and we work well together. So I can tell you, though, I'll definitely keep your cell phone, and certainly I'll be asking you more questions in years to come. So I want to thank you for your 20 years of service on behalf of the Select Board and the 65,000 people that live in this community. I don't think they realize how much work that you've done for this community, so we all appreciate that.
Happy to do it.
So with that being said, this is the end of the show, and again, thank you, and to all those who have tuned in. If you want to learn more about all of our recreation activities and everything that's going on in community resources, please visit our website at www.plymouth-ma.gov. Until next week, I'll see you then. Thank you.